I'm Isaac, and welcome to Stuff You Need to Know About Australian History. Today's episode will focus on the last few years, highlighting the principal reason we study history. In 2008, the world faced the worst economic downturn since the Depression, which you'll remember from our 6th episode wasn't fun. This came following the collapse of the American real estate market. The Rudd Labor government, which had been elected in November 2007, responded with a $10 billion stimulus package in late 2008 and followed it up with a somewhat larger $42 billion stimulus in early 2009. It worked. While other developed economies, such as America, most of Europe, Russia and Japan, slipped into recession, the Australian economy continued to grow. The package did, however, attract criticism for its size and a home insulation scheme funded by the stimulus. The rationale behind the scheme was simple. If people were incentivised to insulate their homes, they'd use less electricity for heating. Unfortunately, the implementation of the scheme was terribly mismanaged and 4 young men tragically died of electrocution installing pink bats insulation. The government was embarrassed and Environment Minister Peter Garrett was forced to resign. Climate change would be a great challenge for Rudd generally. Rudd had campaigned strongly on the platform of an emissions trading scheme, saying,
"Climate change is the great moral challenge of our generation."
His scheme involved a requirement that businesses buy permits to produce carbon dioxide emissions. The Senate declined to pass this scheme twice in 2009 and Rudd declined to do much about it. As it happens, labelling an issue the great moral challenge of our time and then not doing much about it tends to damage one's credibility. When news of Rudd's inaction leaked in April 2010, his public popularity crashed. Rudd was already hated by many of his own ministers for a dysfunctional and dictatorial style of governing, by which Rudd would demand to make most government decisions and then proceed not to make them. 2 months later, the federal election produced a hung parliament. For the first time since the 1940s, neither the Labor or coalition parties won a majority of seats in the House of Representatives. Gillard managed to form a minority government with the support of 3 independents and the Australian Greens. Gillard was able to legislate on climate change in the new parliament. Unlike Rudd's scheme, hers involved the government directly taxing industries for each tonne of carbon produced. However, the public felt betrayed due to an election promise of Gillard's that she would not introduce a carbon tax. Gillard was already unpopular due to public perceptions that she had betrayed Kevin Rudd and stabbed him in the back when she replaced him as leader. As a result of this, despite pursuing popular reforms in school funding and a national disability insurance scheme, she herself was highly unpopular and her leadership was continually undermined both with the public and within the Labor Party by Kevin Rudd and his parliamentary supporters. This reached a pinnacle in June 2013 when, 3 months out from an election, Rudd returned to the Labor leadership. Because I guess the Labor caucus decided they just made a mistake and needed 3 years to think about it. Labor was defeated by the coalition under the leadership of Tony Abbott at the September election. Abbott had promised to abolish Gillard's carbon tax, which he did in mid-2014. Unsurprisingly, carbon emissions, which had seen their largest decline in 24 years under the tax, began increasing again once it had been abolished at a rate suggestive of 0.8% a year. The government pledged $2.55 billion to a fund for so-called direct action on climate change. However, most scientists and economists agreed that this wasn't nearly enough for such an approach to be effective. The Abbott government was more interested in balancing the budget than it was in tackling climate change. Those stimulus packages had replaced the federal budget's $10.6 billion surplus in 2007 with a projected $18 billion deficit in 2013. The coalition's promise to eliminate the deficit was popular, but, surprise, surprise, the spending cuts implemented to do so were not. Many of them, including a GP co-payment and funding cuts to universities, were blocked in the Senate, and the projected deficit grew to almost $30 billion in the coalition's first year of government. This brings us more or less to the present and raises an important question. Where to from here? Already, leadership tensions are building in the government, despite its term not having reached the halfway point. Ultimately, our future as a nation will depend on our decisions as Australians, and this goes to the heart of why we study history. We examine the past to help us make good decisions in the future by learning from our successes and our mistakes. It's also important to remember that future generations will judge us for the decisions we make. These are decisions like how we vote in elections, the way we react to those different from us, or how we choose to use our money. Even the sort of music we listen to can tell people something about the time in which we live. Over the last few weeks, this is what we've tried to convey. Thanks for watching.